Shutterstock Music.
Litmus is a toolset to do cognitive chaos engineering. Litmus provides tools to orchestrate chaos on Kubernetes to help SREs find weaknesses in their deployments. SREs use Litmus to run chaos experiments initially in the staging environment and eventually in production to find bugs and vulnerabilities. Fixing the weaknesses lead to increase resilience of the system. Litmus takes a cognitive approach to create, manage, and monitor chaos. And chaos is orchestrated using following Kubernetes custom resource definitions: chaos engines, chaos experiments, and chaos result. Hey, how are you doing? Welcome to the CloudNative.fm podcast, episode number 21. And today I am joined by the two resources from LitmusChaos, Prithvi and Sayan. Let me first introduce to you who Sayan is. Sayan currently works at Chaos Native as a software engineer and contributed to Litmus, the CNCF project, a complete framework to implement chaos engineering within a cloud-native ecosystems. He helped design, architect, and execute Litmus Web with precision. He is passionate about development and curious about breaking stuff with the practice of chaos engineering. Sayan is an active speaker and a Litmus tutor in the CNCF community, helping users get onboarded and debug problems pertaining to Litmus. In chaos engineering, he focuses on operation and resilience management. And let me introduce my second guest to you. Prithvi has been an active community manager in not only building Litmus Chaos, the CNCF project based on cloud-native chaos engineering, but also the overall chaos engineering community by working extensively as a co-organizer of the global conference Chaos Carnival as well as KCD Bangalore 2021. He has been hosting monthly meetups at the CNCF Kubernetes Chaos Engineering Meetup Group. His love for chaos engineering started in 2020 and has been growing ever since, leading to the active adoption of chaos testing as a means of testing. He has delivered talks at various platforms, notably KCD Africa, Kubernetes Spinning Group, GitLab, Cafe, etc. And let's say hi to Prithvi and Sayan and cut it over to the interview.
Shutterstock Music. Shutterstock Music. Shutterstock Music.
Thank you everyone for joining us today on this episode of CloudNative.fm podcast. And today we are talking about how to break Kubernetes and then fix things up with my guest from Litmus Chaos team, Prithvi and Sayan Mondal. And today we explain to you why it is important to you to bring in the solution of Chaos Native and what it brings to you when you have something called Litmus Chaos in Kubernetes stack and Kubernetes infrastructure. So let's go first to the Prithvi. How are you? Can you introduce yourself to my audience? And can you introduce our Litmus to my audience, what it is and what it is for.
Sure, Sam. Thanks a lot, first of all, for inviting both of us here. And we are really glad to be a part of this podcast. And my name is Prithvi, as Sam mentioned, and I am the community manager for the Litmus Chaos project. And I started off this journey last year back in May, and it's been 1.5 years since I'm part of this project. We started at Maya Data, and now we are part of the Chaos Native team. And other than this, I run the Chaos Engineering meetups in the CNCF space every last Saturday of the month, and also I'm one of the co-organizers of Chaos Carnival. We had our inaugural edition this year itself, and it's all about chaos engineering for me, but with the community work growing. So I'm also working as I worked as a co-organizer for KCD Bangalore Kubernetes Community Days, and I think Siam is also looking forward to host one of the editions of KCD Pakistan. So I hope that comes into fray very quickly, and I'm looking forward to that as well.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you
indeed.
for explaining all these kind of stuff. So before I start answering some of the questions regarding the chaos native and cloud native, let's go to Sayan. And Sayan, can you introduce yourself? Where are you from, and what are you working, and what's your role in Litmus Chaos and Chaos Native team?
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Sayan. I have been working with the Litmus project for over a year, almost over a year, and so I mostly am a software engineer at Chaos Native, and I am a core contributor to this Litmus Chaos project. So, in this project, we basically look for breaking stuff in production and also like a cross cluster, a cross cloud based service toolkit basically, which we work on, and I am one of the core contributors of that project. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Gil. Thank you very much for explaining this intro. So let's first start our discussion, because I think that every cloud native project and open source project that I've seen, I think it needs some kind of a community to recognize with, and that's very important. Because in the open source world, you need the contributor from all over the world to showcase their knowledge, and based on their knowledge, we can do a lot of great things. So I think Prithvi is very. I think Prithvi can introduce this concept of community, and also I want to interesting to know what chaos native and what litmus chaos is, because I think some other tools in Kubernetes landscape, they have start from the open source tooling to the commercial and enterprise software. But I'm really interesting to know what is chaos native first, and then we start discussing what the litmus is chaos is.
Sure, Sam. So I think first talking about the community itself, as you mentioned. So back when we started, or I started last year itself, the community was having 50 members. I mean, it was, you could say it was nothing, or chaos engineering adoption has been good. I mean, a lot of people have been adopting chaos, but if you talk about the open source side of things or the cloud native side of things, the adoption was not that high. A lot of people did not know that chaos engineering also exists as a CNCF project or in a cloud native form. And we wanted to change the scenario itself. And today I can proudly say that the Slack community itself is 750 plus members. But other than this, the amount of adoption that we have seen, more than 100,000 installations, more than I mean, 1 to 2 million Docker pulls. So I think that shows a lot that how cloud native chaos engineering has come forward. And if you talk about who needs it, then everyone needs it. I mean, initially we thought just the SRE persona is something that needs to be focused upon when talking about chaos engineering. But today, even the developers, even who are building, or even consultants, everyone is requiring chaos engineering in some for their businesses or for themselves to test their clusters. The developer community has come forward in a strong way, and the developer persona also requires chaos engineering to test, just test something that they are working on. So I mean, that is why I think the community has support is very essential. Of course, I mean, we are doing a podcast with you, but a lot of folks are interested in talking about chaos these days. Every now and then there is some blog which is coming out, and chaos engineering, as you know, is like, for example, Kubernetes has reached the market already. there's a lot of adoption there, but chaos engineering has not reached the market completely. There are companies, I mean, Netflix started it, we all know that, and then folks like Amazon, Google, and Apple, and even Disney Plus and HBO Max, these platforms have been adopting chaos engineering in some way or the other. But I would still suggest that, I mean, what I have received from the community, banking sectors, fintech sectors, automobile sectors, even these sectors need to adopt chaos in some form. And now, talking about what chaos native is, I mean, I could have introduced Litmus first, but with chaos native, we thought that we will provide that support to the community, we will provide the support to the enterprises. I mean, community, we are doing it anyway, right? With Litmus, we are providing support to the community. We want the chaos engineering adoption to take flight. But with chaos native, what we decided was to provide support for Litmus Chaos, or come up with a SaaS solution later on. But as of now, just come up with enterprise support or managed services support to various enterprises, where we go ahead and talk about chaos, help them understand their workloads, what is their infrastructure, and then how we can come up with chaos engineering solutions for them, because every system is different. I mean, I'll just give an example that someone is working on an application which is based on 5G solutions, telecom solutions, and then the telco sector is completely different. How they run chaos testing in their environment, I think, is different from how banking sectors run. So that is where we understand their solutions, their applications, and run a chaos engineering game day. For example, a chaos engineering game day is running a chaos test or a series of chaos tests specific to their solutions. And that is how we understand what is the requirement of that application, or what kind of chaos tests should be run. And that is why with Litmus Chaos, I'll come to everything about Litmus later on. But with Litmus Chaos, one thing we wanted to think about is GitOps. I think GitOps is something which is coming up in a big way, and trying to scale these solutions, trying to create workflows where we can run various chaos tests together was something of priority. So that is where we come in and provide this support. And then, of course, Litmus Chaos, as you know, is the tool set behind this. It's one of the top cloud native chaos engineering tool sets out there. And for that, I think we'll come to introduce chaos testing. But in short, I mean, chaos engineering, as you know, is deliberately inducing an outage in the system to understand how does it react when it goes into production, or how does it react when there are adverse conditions, chaotic conditions. For example, as I mentioned, Netflix invented it. Why? Because, for example, there was a series or something like Money Heist, which comes up on Netflix, and there are a lot of users who want to watch it at that moment, or that time, and there's a spike in the number of users, right? So you need to scale, you need to understand how does the system react when there's a spike, and what sort of an outage is possible. So for that reason itself, some amount of chaos testing, they introduced Chaos Monkey. That was the initial tool set that came up, and that is how some amount of chaos tests were necessary to understand and scale the systems. And now automation has come up in such a way that people don't want to create or curate their experiments manually, but in an automated way. So I think that is also something where Litmus Chaos comes into play and helps conduct these experiments in an automated manner. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think right now Kubernetes need these kind of solution, because we all know Kubernetes is a quite complex, and if you are into the production environment, there are so many things get involved into it. Might be you running a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud, or might be you running the Kubernetes cluster in the IoT like edge devices. So it's really important to understand how things are happening in your system, and you have to break those systems up in order to fully understand those systems. That's called reverse engineering, but I think that's really important, the vital piece of cloud native infrastructure. So let's go to the Sayan. Okay, Sayan can introduce to us what the Litmus does when you first install, what you see in the cluster, in the Kubernetes cluster, it's changes. Either install on the CRD base or the Helm chart. Can you explain to our audience what the entire process of installing Litmus into the Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I'll first start with introducing Litmus, what exactly Litmus does and what it is. So Litmus is like a cross cloud control plane. You can call it that. It's a toolkit. It started out as a toolkit. You can now explain it as a framework because it does a lot of those things, and you can integrate it definitely in any other Kubernetes cluster instead of just one singular cluster. So it has a lot of capabilities. So it started out as a toolkit. Now you can call it as a framework. So what Litmus does is it helps you induce chaos in your particular workload. So you can create either one singular experiment, chaos experiment. You can wrap it up in an entire workflow with multiple chaos experiments, or you can also like create a cron job out of those chaos workflow, and then you can use the cron to induce chaos in a particular recurring schedule. So this started out only for SREs like Prithvi mentioned, but like we figured out that this is not generally what an ops team should do. Rather, everyone should like focus on this. So we also shifted to the dev people as well as all the different cycles of product release cycle. So let's say you can try it in your dev cycle, you can try it in pre-production or in production. So chaos engineering generally like tethers to we do break stuff in production, but with Litmus you can also try it in development, also in pre-production, or if you have a staging cluster. So that gives you a lot of flexibility where you have your cluster installed. And also talking about installation, there are two different modes of installation. One is cluster scope and another is namespace scope. So what is cluster scope? Let's say you have one singular cluster A and you have cluster B, for example. So you can install Litmus in cluster A and you can induce chaos on any application running on cluster B. Let's say you have multiple clusters A to Z, and not just Z, you can have as many as you want. So currently we also did a test of about 1,000 plus agents or clusters in our system, so that worked without any latency. So you can have as many as you like. And so if you want to induce chaos in any of the other clusters, you can do so using the cluster scope installation. But let's say you're working in an enterprise, which sometimes you get access to a certain namespace in a cluster and not the entire cluster. So you can do a namespace scope installation, and with that, what you can do is, let's say your application is running on that namespace in the shared cluster, you can induce chaos in that particular namespace itself, and Litmus will be installed in that namespace only. So other namespaces won't be affected. So if you go to docs.litmuschaos.io, there are two different steps mentioned as well on installation. You can either apply the Kubernetes manifest directly, which will install it in the Litmus namespace. You can of course change it. And there's another step of Helm install, so you can also install Litmus through Helm. So with Helm installation, you have to manually create the Litmus namespace and install it there. And yeah, these are the two different options that we provide for installation. So once the installation commences, you would see certain chaos CRDs pop up. So the three major CRDs that we use are Chaos Experiment, Chaos Engine, and Chaos Results. So what this generally means is we have a lot of chaos experiments. If you see hub.litmuschaos.io, we have a lot of them focusing on individual workloads. So let's say, for example, you just want to start out, you can do a pod delete experiment, which is the base chaos experiment. And you can try container kill, or you can try disk fill, or even you can go to length, and you can also induce chaos on Kubernetes, any uh, other cloud provider. Let's say you can induce chaos on GKE or AWS or even VMware. So you have those sort of flexibility. You have base experiments as well as bigger experiments too. So you decide what you want to go in the flow. So that is the hub, or where we have a list of experiments. So that is the chaos experiment CRD that we have, which consists of the boilerplate template of the entire experiment. Then comes the chaos engine, which sort of binds your chaos experiment with the application instance. So let's say you want to do an nginx pod delete. So chaos engine would actually bind the nginx pod, which is on a different cluster, let's say. So it will bind that chaos experiment, which is running on, let's say, cluster A. You install chaos experiment on cluster A, you want to induce on cluster B. So chaos engine will bind the two. And there is something called chaos result, which when you finish the experiment, results will actually show the verdict, whether it passed or failed, and what was the probe success percent and those things. So basically the metadata of the experiment will be visible after you finish the chaos workflow. And there's a middleware, I can call it as a middleware, the heart of this entire CRD, which is chaos operator, which reconciles the entire step and like keeps a watch on the chaos engine, whether you have triggered chaos or not. So installing an experiment doesn't mean you're triggering chaos. Installing the chaos engine would mean you're triggering chaos. So these are the three important CRDs that we have, and these sort of reconcile the entire step. And when you install Litmus, you will actually see all these different CRDs in your document itself.
I think the first step is going when you install the Litmus Chaos. you need some predefined checks to ensure how the system breaks. So I think you have some experimented chaos tests there available in, I think, hub.litmus.io. You can experiment with that. And if you need some kind of more granular control, you can write on top of that experiment and you can do these kind of things. So I think that's number one part of it. And also, as you mentioned, I think the three CRD. I think having a less CRD is more important because you see already there's a Kubernetes, there's a floods of APIs, and if you increase the CRD, it's difficult to manage, difficult to understand, and there's a learning step involved in every step of the way. So I think that's really a good way of managing and three CRD. So I think the next question is for you, Sayan, is that what are the initial steps? What are the pieces that Litmus break and experiment with it? Let's say, can the Litmus, it might be the part of that they are broken images that is deployed on the cluster and then test when the broken images are up into the cluster, what happened to the cluster? Either it's broken the node, either it's broken the entire cluster. So what the broken past part of the Litmus working process?
So let's say you have something which is broken, right? So you have a cluster, you have an application in your cluster B which is broken, and you're trying to do chaos, inject chaos on that particular application. So you may select, like you mentioned, that there are these hub.litmuschaos which comes pre-built with when you install Litmus. So these are like predefined experiments which has sockshop, the standard chaos experiment, and also the pod delete experiment. So these are the two predefined ones we support. Also, there's something called as a custom experiment, which is where this thing comes. So let's say you want to test this broken cluster with some sort of an experiment. What happens is you would select that custom experiment, you would go through the entire schedule. So Litmus allows you to create a workflow schedule from A to Z. But what you'll do is you'll just name the schedule anything, and you'll just select the experiments, chaos experiments that you want to inject on that particular cluster B application that is broken. So there's an extended configuration wizard that pops up on tune workflow step exactly, which is step number 4. So what happens there is you can like add probes, your own customized probes. You can add a particular label and those sort of checks like the app namespace, which namespace is your cluster, is the application deployed on. So you can use those to target your particular application. Also, since this is a broken pod and you might have some other, let's say, pods or containers running there, you can also annotate your application with an annotation check. So what it will do, it will control the blast radius so that it doesn't affect the other pods. So once you have everything set up and you want to target that particular application on the cluster B, which is already broken, but the Litmus, this entire flow doesn't know it yet. So once you have done so, you can if you want to check for, let's say it's broken in a particular HTTP or web request, you can induce add a probe, which is particularly an HTTP probe, which will check for that specifically. If not, if you do not know what is the breakage, you can just directly induce, let's say, whatever type of chaos. You can play around with what type of experiments you will perform. And let's say there's a problem with the pod delete. So if you inject pod delete, that pod will show you certain verdict and give you certain logs. So with the help of logs, you can understand. So once you inject the chaos, what happens is you get certain chaos logs as well as chaos results directly in the Litmus UI itself, in the Litmus, the control plane. So with the help of logs, you can see that after installation, after the experiment installation and when it's induced, there was some problem with the induction. So let's say this particular step didn't go through, or this didn't happen because your cluster's namespace wasn't there, or your cluster's particular something wasn't there. So you see that in the log, and you can even download the log and share it with your teams if you want to. And also in the chaos result, which comes after your injection is finished, you'll also see that the verdict has been failed, and also the probe success percent if you had probes induced there. So these two CRs actually help you understand what exactly went wrong and what exactly in your particular container or pod is broken, or in your application is broken. So with the help of that, you can fix it and then retry.
Yes, definitely. I think that's really important to see the logs of what happening when there's something has to be broken, and what are the health check and health probe, how they are affecting, because that's really important. You have some kind of health check, like Kubernetes provide you these kind of health probes, status probe, liveness, readiness checks. You need to show how they are working, and you need to know in the production environment they have to work in a proper way. So that's really important what you suggest. And another question that's pop up in my mind. Let's say we all works on the GitHub repositories, and somebody induced some kind of breakage or these kind of stuff. So do Litmus work as configured as a CI/CD pipeline, and somebody pull a request to it in the GitHub repository? It's checked to ensure the code that is written to it that is resilient to failures and fault tolerance to failures. So I think we can we set up Litmus as a CI/CD pipeline?
Yeah, definitely you can. So there's this GitHub action. You can not just Git. You can do. You can integrate it with GitLab, with Spinnaker, with Captain, and also with GitHub. So in GitHub, it performs. It has this GitHub action which is called Kubernetes Chaos. If you go to GitHub Action Marketplace and you just search for Chaos, there's a Litmus Chaos, Kubernetes Chaos by Litmus Chaos GitHub action which pops up. So once you add that particular CI/CD, that GitHub action in your workflow, in your GitHub flow, so what it'll do is it'll ask for which experiment do you want to run, and it doesn't support an entire workflow yet, but you can chain multiple experiments to create a workflow that will sort of simulate it as a workflow. So what you can do is, let's say we call it a chaos check. So there's a stage A and stage B. So you're doing a different check, let's say something else in your CI pipeline. So after that check, you want to induce this particular chaos experiment. So you can add it after that. So once you use that GitHub action, what it will do is you can explain, or you can add all these different experiments, chaos experiments that you want to induce, and it will go ahead and do all the heavy lifting for you. So it will install Litmus in the background, do all this installation step, and just execute that particular experiment that you ran, and post that it will also give you the logs in the GitHub action screen, the tab that GitHub has. So if something went wrong, that will obviously fail, and you can go back to your CI GitHub action tab, and you can check the logs, what exactly went wrong, and post that after it finishes. If it's successful, it will also give you the post, like the message along with the chaos result message in your pipeline itself. So you will get a full-on mini version of whatever happens in the major Litmus control plane in your pipeline.
Awesome. That's really important. I think the GitHub actions and these kind of, they are really important thing, because you work in the team and somebody writing a code and you want to test those things in a CI/CD pipeline and ensure that things are working properly as expected. And next thing, I think, do Litmus Chaos work with every cluster? What I means by this, can Litmus work with the K3s, K0s, micro K8s, or in the cloud like Azure Kubernetes Service, EKS, on any public cloud offering? So I assume that Litmus has to work with every Kubernetes cluster, whether on the small cluster like K3s, K0s, to the management cluster like AKS, EKS, or GKE.
Yes, indeed, it works with every cluster. I mean, Minikube, GKE, EKS. One thing is the Kubernetes clusters. I mean, if with Kubernetes K0s, K3s, we have already tested with K3s. Even on CVO, Litmus has been run, and on the K3s application itself, we have run Litmus. And if you talk about non-Kubernetes scenarios, now there are two things. Obviously, Litmus runs on a Kubernetes cluster, no Kubernetes control plane, and for the non-Kubernetes scenarios, what we do is through an API, it is connected to any sort of solution, let's say AWS, Azure, or GCP, and then you can run on that as well, the non-Kubernetes scenarios. And on any cluster, Litmus is obviously pretty easy to run, but on ECS, I think Litmus availability is still not there. That is coming up. But on any other cluster, obviously you can just put out Litmus and start running. And even on VMs, bare metal, you can easily use Litmus. So and with the Litmus portal, I think I'll take this opportunity to talk about Litmus 2.0 as well. So what we do with Litmus 2.0 is basically, I mean, we want to induce multi-cloud chaos engineering, or cross-cloud and multi-cloud hybrid cloud chaos engineering. So what happens is Litmus has a portal. It's the UI of the, basically it's the UI that acts as, you know, something where you visualize your chaos experiments running, you schedule your chaos engineering experiments, your chaos engineering workflows. As I mentioned, a workflow is nothing but inducing chaos engineering in series, various chaos tests, let's say a pod delete experiment, a pod CPU hog, a pod memory hog experiment. That will be in series or parallel. That is how you curate your workflows, which as of now we run with Argo CD. Argo, as you know, another CNCF project. So we run with that, but we are looking for alternate solutions as well, Flux and curating our own chaos workflows. And then these are the various, I mean, as I mentioned about GitOps, and then also what the portal allows you is to schedule these experiments accordingly, visualize them. So all these things happen, and then this portal is connected with the cluster itself. I mean, it's either a Kubernetes cluster or it can be a VMware. I mean, if you have an infrastructure, then there can be multiple, I mean, infrastructures that you have, right? VMware based infrastructure, something is on Azure, or you're running something on an AWS cluster. So that is how Litmus portal functions, and you can run experiments on all these infrastructures. And the second thing is that there were a lot of questions that is Litmus just based on Kubernetes? Is Litmus all about Kubernetes? What about the non-Kubernetes scenarios, or Azure based tests, or non-Kubernetes based tests, where either people are having legacy systems or have not moved to Kubernetes completely? They have switched to cloud, but they have not switched to Kubernetes. So for that as well, we created a lot of tests. I mean, for AWS, there's an EC2 terminate test, and then for Azure, there's an instance terminate, and then there's a VM switch off test as well. So these are the various tests that we came up with, and there is a specific requirement for Azure. Today, a lot of folks have talked about specific requirements to Azure itself. So our focus is also shifting towards Azure and creating chaos around Redis and MongoDB. But I mean, one thing which is very good about Litmus is the SDK, or the BYOC, that bring your own chaos experiment, where anyone can come in and write their own experiment. You just have to pull in the Litmus Helm chart, and then you can write your own chaos experiment and run it accordingly. So even if it's not available on the hub, I mean, the chaos hub is a great marketplace. It already has a lot of chaos experiments. Specifically for Kubernetes, I don't think a lot of chaos experiments are missing. Something like a black hole attack, or an IO chaos, or a stress chaos, load chaos. These things are already coming up. But if you talk about the non-Kubernetes scenarios, I think if you talk about cloud native adoption, or I mean, in the enterprise way, basically, like the developers find it pretty easy to pull in an experiment from the hub and run it. But if you talk about enterprise adoption, folks who want to adopt chaos, let's say, for example, someone like a Lenskart.com. Lenskart is an e-commerce platform for sunglasses in India. So they wanted to adopt chaos. So they were moving into Kubernetes completely, but they still had some non-Kubernetes scenarios. So that is where they also suggested and are planning to contribute. So I think the community also comes into play, where they contribute various use cases, and that is how we are able to run chaos on various platforms and for various solutions as well.
Yes, I think that's awesome, and I think people are looking into it without known Kubernetes scenario. And one of the scenarios might be the Docker in the Docker pipeline. Let's say you build an image, it's worked properly, and now you want to break that image that you pull from the Docker hub, and you want to know how it's works. So I think with the Docker, and there is so much, as you suggest, that the VM, you could break the VM, you could break the networking inside the VM, how the things are working if the network is not working properly inside the VM. I think there's a whole ton of scenarios going on. I think we can do a whole, I think, 24-hour session on just how much thing you can break and test with the Litmus and these kind of activities. I think, but the non-Kubernetes and non-cluster scenarios, I think it's really important. So before I let you go, let's go to the Sayan and just discuss these two last topics. That is Litmus Chaos. Let's say you are inducing the service mesh, or using the service mesh on the K3s cluster, on Kubernetes, any cluster. And do Litmus break some in third parties like Linkerd? Let's say we have a sidecar, and then Litmus can break the sidecar. And what happens when the sidecar is not working properly, and is generate the report to the user that one of the sidecar is not working properly? These things can happen in the production environment. Do they have this kind of workflow already in the Litmus Chaos? If you didn't, if they have there in the roadmap for the future?
Yeah. So Litmus wraps the entire workflow in an Argo environment, in an Argo CD. So everything in Litmus is Argo workflows. So let's say you want to add your own personal, in this case, linkered or any your own custom solution. There's always this option of custom workflows where you can create these sort of any scenario that you want to induce. If you already have an image, let's say, which already has everything installed, you just need to add this particular image and induce chaos on your sidecar or anything. So you can use an option. There's an option called image registry where you can just register your particular image, whichever you have already created, and you can use that image to induce chaos on this particular sidecar scenario. So you can create your own scenarios based on your requirement. So even if it was some other provider, you can do so. You can write your own experiments, and there's an option called charts, private charts in Litmus as well, which is by basic it's hub.litmuschaos.io is connected by default. So if you have a specific scenario which focuses entirely on, let's say, in your case it's a sidecar, so you can write your own chaos, just like Prithvi mentioned with BYOC, bring your own chaos. You can write your own chaos with Argo CD, and you can integrate this particular chart in Litmus and use that chart to induce chaos on your particular scenario that you just talked about. So it doesn't have to be like you don't have to create everything inside of Litmus. You can create it in your Git repository as well, and then you can just attach that particular chart in Litmus and use it. So if you already have a chaos scenario that works that way, you can just use that chart directly.
Yes, definitely. That's really important news for me because I'm using Linkerd and service meshes a lot. I'm thinking about one of the sidecar is not working, what I do there. So last question to you, Sayan, before I let you go, is the broken tests that are the chaos engineering tests that we have written. As part of the GitOps, you should know the GitOps process is they sync the code from your repo and then do the deployment on the cloud or the any workstation you have. So when you written these kind of chaos native tests, or you are deploying these as part of the GitOps in the Git repo, or what the developing workflow. I just want to understand what the developer workflow is. Developer are just pushes these reports to the teams. How the workflow is happening inside the GitOps process.
Okay, so this is specifically for GitOps or like how we developers work for Litmus?
Yes, I think we can scratch on what the developers workflow inside the GitOps when they submit the code to the GitHub repository. What next things the Litmus what Litmus things are being into the repository. Let's say they have some test reports on the chaos reports that they want to share with their teams that these things are happening. So that's part of the journey.
Got it. So by default, we have whatever we do is stored in locally in Litmus. So we have a Mongo stateful set that actually collects all this data that we do. Let's say we run a workflow, the schedule, the time of the schedule, how many experiments were there in the schedule is stored in Mongo. So we can later use it to do analytics. We can also there's a CRD called Chaos Exporter, which actually exports all the different metrics that we have. So if you have your own analytics solution, let's say, because Litmus comes pre-built with Prometheus and Grafana. Prometheus is the monitoring tool. So if you're not using Prometheus, then you can also take these metrics out using the CR and install it, like install your own, integrate your own chaos analytics solution. But yeah, so by default it comes inbuilt with Mongo as a local solution. But there's also an option to switch to GitOps. So if you go to settings and switch your flow to GitOps, then what happens is it completely removes everything from Mongo and it will treat your Git as a DB. So it will work with the Git as a DB solution, and then whatever you inject the chaos, that will be stored in GitHub. So what it does is it will just give a random workflow ID number in your Git repository, and then it will store all the different information related to that inside of GitHub. So that way you get a version control system right there, and you can use it to do any sort of planning. And there's also another CR that works in the background called as event tracker. So if you do any change in GitHub, then it will auto induce chaos, like it will re-execute the workflow in the Litmus control plane. So it will be in sync both ways. So that is one way that the developer flow helps. Also in the analytics section of Litmus, you can actually select multiple workflows, and then you can export the metrics and they will come out as a PDF. So what you are talking about sharing with the teams. So we can share actually that report that comes out as to, let's say it's a cron workflow. So how many times did the cron run actually? If it's a singular workflow, then what is the comparison between the cron and the singular one? If the same experiment is running on both places, then how exactly did they two differ. So it will just come out as a PDF, and then you can just share it with your teams. Or also, if you're already running the control plane, you can just see it there.
That's awesome. That's a great news. That's a really great feature to have it. You have some kind of Prometheus Grafana support, and if you don't already have one, then you store that so the GitOps, and GitOps you store that in the Git repository. You can share with the teams. I think that's a great working flow in the Litmus Chaos. So before I let you go, Sayan, thank you very much for all of these detailed information, detailed guides on what the Litmus Chaos does is. Learned so many great things from you. So before I let you go, Prithvi, can you share if somebody listening to us and they really want to contribute to this open source project, how to get started with it and how to find the community? Can you draw some points where to get started the Litmus and where to get started the Litmus community?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, sure. So, Sam, I mean, there are two things to get started with Litmus. I think the first and foremost thing is, I mean, if folks have already got started with chaos engineering or any open source project, then there are two sides of it. If they are well versed with chaos, then they can obviously come in and contribute chaos experiments or some new feature which is related to one chaos tool but is not part of Litmus. So that would be easy for them. Let's say there are open source contributors who are contributing to open source projects or Kubernetes that way. So for them, I think, I mean, Litmus is written on Go. I mean, most of the experiments are based on Go, but you can also curate them on Python or Ansible. So I think, I mean, that will be easier for folks who are versed with at least Go. They can come in and contribute to the backend. And also what folks can do is if they are well versed with, let's say, the front end part of it, they are front end engineers or something. So I think if they have some knowledge based on TypeScript or I think Gatsby sign, if I'm not wrong, so if they can somehow or the other contribute to the front end as well. And we really promote contributions. I mean, what we do is basically whoever comes in, there are a lot of issues that are filed in by contributors or users. So we always understand the issues that are out there and invite folks to take up any issues if they can take up. Or let's say there are very new contributors who need good first issues, so we try to label them as good first issues. Or even during the Hacktoberfest which happened, we tried to bring in a lot of new contributors, even if they can contribute, let's say, to a translation of the Git repo itself, where they understand what chaos is. So once they are good with the understanding, they are invited to the community calls. We have our community calls every third Wednesday of the month at 10 p.m. IST, or you can say 6:30 p.m. CST or 9:30 a.m. PST. I mean, that's the same time. So they are invited to the calls, and how they want to contribute, they can introduce themselves and understand the various key areas to contribute to. And there are a lot of resources that can be shared, but initially I would say reading out the blogs, the GitHub repo, I think that is very and the contributing guidelines, that is pretty informative for everyone. And then we have a Slack community on the Kubernetes Slack, that is the hashtag Litmus channel, or you can join us on Discord as well. We are not that active on Discord, but in case you join in and ask your questions, we are always there to respond you. That is the Cloud Native Chaos Engineering Discord channel. I think it's called a Discord channel or something, and then the Litmus channel in the Kubernetes workspace. So that is where we are. But Twitter, YouTube, anywhere you just tag us or you find us, and we are ready to help you. Also, there are Litmus tutorials on the Litmus Chaos YouTube channel. So if you get started with the videos, I think that will be very helpful for you to understand Litmus and how does it function. And then our maintainers and contributors are always there to encourage you to contribute.
Yes, thank you very much for explaining all these kind of things to us. So hopefully people are listening to us on YouTube, they find the link to join the Slack from the Litmus Chaos team and ask question what you want to see, because your feedback is really important. As of any open source projects, community is really vital to us. We need to understand what your use cases are if you are wanting to run Litmus Chaos in your cloud native stack. But thank you very much, Sayan, and thank you, Prithvi, to share your insights on why it is important to have chaos engineering or Litmus Chaos in your cloud native stack. And Sayan, thank you very much for explaining all these of details of development workflow, the GitOps process, and how you induce your own chaos engineering if you didn't see in the hub.litmus.io. So hopefully I will catch you up again in the future. And I think if you are watching some hands-on guide, I will have a touch with Prithvi and we can do a whole lot of session on webinar things on Litmus Chaos. So follow Cloud Native Islamabad and feel free to ask us question what you want to see next. But thank you and hope you enjoy this podcast and thank you very much for watching. Bye bye everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hey everybody, if you want to keep up what's going on in the cloud native ecosystem, we have a weekly podcast show on YouTube and SoundCloud by the name of Cloud Native Islamabad. You can listen for free every single week. We try to find cloud and cloud native experts, share updates on cloud native best practices, cloud native real world use cases, cloud native deployment patterns, cloud native deployment strategies. Topics include AKS on Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on GCP, cloud native architectures, cloud native application developments, container containerizing application, DevOps and automation, cloud native certification strategies, cloud native career tips, and more. So if that sounds awesome to you, head over to the SoundCloud and YouTube and subscribe to Cloud Native Islamabad.